Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, is the follow-up to what many claim to be the greatest action film of the 21st century in Mad Max Fury Road, but does it live up to the expectations?
Whatever you have to do. However long it takes. Promise me you'll find your way home.
Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, is undeniably epic. I don't think that there is really room for discussion or discourse or debate around that one central topic. Now, where there is room for plenty of debate is whether or not this is a classic, whether or not this is one of the greatest action films of all time if it fulfills the legacy of Fury Road. And there's this weird thing in the film critic world where you're supposed to hate mostly everything because you're pretentious and know cinema better than others, but then there's select few films where you're not allowed to say anything derogatory, and for one reason or another, mostly deserved, Mad Max, be it Fury Road or now this new part of the saga, Furiosa, fits in that category. And the reality is, this is not a perfect movie. Now, before I'm attacked for minor critiques that I might have, let me just reiterate, this is epic. There is so much going on here. George Miller has crafted something extraordinary in many, many ways, something that is unique, something that is a slight subversion on your stereotypical action flick, and of course, Miller and his team should be commended for this work. However, I don't think that we should just be going around willy-nilly calling this film one of the greatest of all time. But before we dive too deep into why that might be, I think it's important that we have some context. The skeleton script for Furiosa was actually written before a single scene of Fury Road was shot. George Miller, in his George Miller way, had written this film essentially just, to provide a little bit of a backstory to Charlize Theron, who played, of course, Furiosa in Fury Road. So this is something that has been in the work for a long time, this literal script since Fury Road, but of course this character has been developing since 1979. And it was not just a long process, kind of a long road leading us here, but the shoot and the post-production was also epic. We had 6 months of shooting for this film, which is almost unheard of in these very tight, kind of strict and specific Hollywood deadlines for filmmaking. There's one section of the film, the stowaway sequence, which was probably the best sequence of the entire film, that took 78 days to film. 78 days is more than most feature-length films are able to budget to shoot for. So to shoot this one essentially extended sequence took almost 3 months. There have been stories, reports of how awful it was to shoot. Not anything to say about George Miller, who everyone seems to respect very, very deeply, but just the grueling nature of a shoot of this length, particularly one that requires so much physicality and so much action from its actors, but also from its crew. And if that isn't enough, it took 1 year, 1 full year to edit this project. That's not kind of working a couple hours here and there. That is essentially a year of full-time work dedicated toward the editing of this film. And you can see it in the final product. There is a lot going on here. And again, this is commendable for sure, but at times it did feel a little bit self-indulgent. I know I'm not allowed to say that about the great George Miller and the great Mad Max Saga, but it is kind of true. This film is a prequel to Mad Max Fury Road, where we essentially learn the backstory of Furiosa. Of course, Furiosa was originally played by Charlize Theron, but in this film there are two actors, the vast majority of the film, Anya Taylor Joy, who plays kind of this like early adult Furiosa, but we also have Lila Brown, who plays a younger version of Furiosa that we see at the beginning of the film and that we've seen in some of the trailers, that hand reaching out for the apple, of course. And it is described by Miller as an odyssey, as an allegory, as one of these epics that has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. It is a journey of self-discovery in a figurative sense. It's a journey of trying to find home, again, both in a literal and a figurative sense, and it is the word that I have been saying more than any other. It is epic. There is even a bit of a tongue-in-cheek line spoken in the film, essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, one of the characters says, well, let's make it epic. Obviously a bit of a meta reference to the film itself. Something you can't say about this film is that it's boring. It is almost non-stop action, and some of it is absolutely incredible. There are some of the best action sequences of the year here, for sure, without a doubt. What I will say is that there is pretty clearly a lot more CGI used in these action sequences compared to Fury Road, where a lot more was caught in camera. And I'm not here to say that that is inherently a drawback of the film, but it is a difference, and stylistically it does separate itself a little bit from Fury Road. Of course, a lot of these VFX, including the CGI, is intentionally a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's not hyper-realistic. It reflects kind of the tone of the writing itself. Miller, in tandem with Nico Lathoris, sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name there, who co-wrote the film with Miller, they have this tongue-in-cheek kind of Aussie style where nothing is meant to be taken too seriously. There are jokes littered throughout. Even the costuming, of course, in Mad Max style is a little bit, again, tongue-in-cheek. And the VFX and the CGI do kind of match this. They are far from perfect, but I am certain, beyond a doubt, that this is all part of Miller's vision. Just compared to the previous work, it does seem a little bit less grounded and a little bit more computerized. Even when it comes to Miller's iconic zooms to close-ups of his characters, there was an over-reliance on digital zooms that are subtly different but just don't quite have the same feel as only leaning into dolly zooms, for example. Still, this is a wholly unique vision that does challenge traditional action flick tropes. It is its own beast. And it's incredible that something like this is able to get made. I mentioned the shoot time, I mentioned the editing time, and I, of course, am happy that we are getting more of this, opposed to maybe another completely derivative Marvel film. As mentioned earlier, Anya Taylor Joy plays Furiosa for the bulk of this film, and of course a lot of weight is put on her shoulders. She does not speak a lot, which of course is common if we go back through even the early Mad Max films. And as a result of this, a lot of her performance is through her physicality, and she does a great job. I don't have anything negative to say about her performance. Miller is very much inspired by old silent pictures, which informs both his writing and his direction. So it's not surprising that he encourages his actors to lean into this physicality as a means of expressing their kind of internal state. The other most notable performance, of course, comes from Chris Hemsworth, who plays Dementus, a absolute brute of a man. And he was good. He was funny. He was comedic. I wouldn't say that I was in love with his performance. His voice, and he's talked quite a bit about this in interviews, is modeled after kind of an old school Australian accent, almost like a horse race announcer. And this accent is pretty humorous. My one major kind of qualm that I have is that it's super inconsistent. Sometimes it sounds like a regular Chris Hemsworth, and then sometimes he's just absolutely leaning into this horse race announcer kind of style, and there doesn't always seem to be a complete rhyme or reason there. But again, I think Hemsworth kind of did exactly what he was asked to do with this character. I also mentioned the editing here that took a full year to complete. Not surprising when you see this film. It is an absolute mammoth of an undertaking. Interestingly, and I'm sure a lot of folks are aware of this, but Margaret Sixel, in tandem with Elliot Natman, but Margaret Sixel actually edits this film, and she is married to George Miller. Traditionally, she was not an editor of action films, and Miller really insisted that she edited first Fury Road and now Furiosa to provide that different kind of feel. Not just from a woman's perspective. We don't have many women who are editing action films, unfortunately, but just from like a non-action perspective. And again, the editing here is certainly different than your just traditional basic action flick, for better or for worse. Look, at the end of the day, and I'm going to use this word one last time, Furiosa is epic. I am not willing to put it as one of the greatest action films of all time. I do think it's a tad self-indulgent. I do think that there was a little bit more movement towards CGI away from in-camera effects, but it is a hell of a good time. It is worth seeing in theaters in IMAX if you can, and I hope that we get more in the future. If you watched this whole video, thanks so much. Appreciate it, as always. Do the like thing, the comment thing, the subscribe thing. All helpful, I am told. And then when the next one comes out, you can watch that one too. Thanks.